Our first example of active transport is going to be protein pumps. And what they do, we call primary active transport. And the reason that we say primary active transport is because these protein pumps use ATP directly. So let's draw this out. So I made a simplified version of the membrane here. This circle inside of the membrane, that is our protein pump. It is a protein that stretches across the membrane. And I'm going to say that this top space is outside of the cell, and this bottom space is inside the cell. And so what this protein pump is going to do is pull in potassium ions, so K+. And if you don't remember that K+ is potassium, we can write it down just under there so we remember. And it's going to push out sodium ions. Remember, sodium is Na+. So it pumps in potassium while also pumping out sodium. Not only in this class, but in SL and HL biology, this protein is going to be one of the most important that you study. And it is called, get this, the sodium-potassium pump. So if you could include that label somewhere there, that would be awesome. But because it requires active transport, we need to get some energy to be able to do this. That's because outside the cell already has a high concentration of sodium ions. And inside the cell already has a high concentration of potassium ions. And what this means is that both of these ions are moving against their concentration gradient. So there was already a high concentration of sodium outside the cell, and we pushed more sodium in there. And there was already a high concentration of potassium inside the cell, and we pull more in there. That's why we need some kind of an energy source. We know that energy source is going to be ATP. So what happens is that ATP is on the inside of the cell. We have an ATP. Remember, that is adenosine triphosphate. So this ATP is going to come up to the protein pump. When it reaches the pump, it's going to lose a phosphate. That means it released energy, remember, from our last segment. And then, because it lost its phosphate, it is now ADP. So ATP traveled upwards to the sodium-potassium pump. It lost one of its phosphate groups, and because it lost a phosphate group, it broke that bond, therefore it released a great amount of energy. In fact, it released enough energy to pull in potassium against its concentration gradient and push out sodium against its concentration gradient. So it lost a phosphate. Now our ATP has become ADP. ADP is just adenosine diphosphate. And di just means two. So now we still have that adenosine, that nucleotide, but now we only have one phosphate to phosphate bond. So the protein pump needs energy directly. The sodium-potassium pump could not pull in potassium and push out sodium without the help of the energy that is released when we break a phosphate off of ATP. And when we lose a phosphate on adenosine triphosphate, we end up with adenosine diphosphate, di meaning two. And another reminder is that both of these things, sodium and potassium, are moving against their concentration gradient. They are moving from areas of low concentration to areas of high concentration.